We have been going through the book of Genesis, and we are at Genesis chapter 46 this morning, starting at verse 31. Genesis chapter 46, starting with verse 31. We have already seen that Joseph has told Pharaoh that his brothers had come for food. And until now, they have not had a chance to meet with Pharaoh. But in our text this morning, they actually meet with Pharaoh. And I want to read for you, starting at chapter 46, and then we're going to go all the way through to chapter 47, verse 12. Chapter 46, verse 31 is where I'm starting. Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and speak to Pharaoh, and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household, who were living in the land of Canaan, have come up to me. The men are shepherds. They tend livestock, and they have brought along their flocks and herds and everything they own. When Pharaoh calls you and asks, what is your occupation? You should answer, your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did. Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen. And listen to this, for all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians. Joseph went and told Pharaoh, my father and brothers, with their flocks and herds and everything they own, have come from the land of Canaan and are now in Goshen. He chose 5 of his brothers and presented them before Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked the brothers, what is your occupation? Your servants are shepherds, they replied to Pharaoh, just as our fathers were. They also said to him, we have come to live here a while because the famine is severe in Canaan, and your servants' flocks have no pasture. So now please let your servants settle in Goshen. Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen. And if you know of any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him before Pharaoh. After Jacob blessed Pharaoh, Pharaoh asked him, how old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramses, as Pharaoh directed. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food according to the number of their children. May God bless this reading from his word. Have you ever been totally honest and then regretted it? Sometimes when we are totally honest, we wish, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Maybe you don't, but that's how I feel sometimes. And being totally honest can be a risky experience, can't it? But total honesty is something that Joseph encouraged in his family. And I want you to think about why he encouraged it so strongly. Remember Jacob? Jacob was known as the deceiver. And there's a problem with deceit too. Every time you tell a lie, you have to remember the lie that you told the next time that you tell a lie so it all makes sense, or else you'll be caught. And the problem with Jacob is that he was so used to telling lies, sometimes he forgot on himself. And when this official time of introduction happened, the major thing that Joseph wanted to encourage his family to do was take the risk of being honest before Pharaoh. And I want to take this concept and apply it to us this morning. And I want to challenge you and I to be honest before God and before each other. Let's start with verses 31 to 34. Joseph prepared his family to meet Pharaoh. He told them what he was going to do. First of all, he was going to be the mediator or the go-between between his family and Pharaoh. I will go up, he says, and speak to Pharaoh on your behalf. I'm going to tell him that my family has come to me. I'm going to tell him that they are shepherds, and I'm going to tell him that they have brought their flocks. Sounds good, right? And he also told them what they should do. Pharaoh will ask you, what is your occupation? Now, one of the benefits that Jacob's family had was that Joseph was familiar with Pharaoh. And Pharaoh had certain procedures, certain ways of acting towards people who were coming to his country. And one of the first questions that Pharaoh would ask is, what is your occupation? Joseph knew that that was Pharaoh's way of operating, so Joseph warned his family, hey folks, this is what you're going to hear from Pharaoh. And as we read on, we found out that Joseph was right on. He knew exactly how Pharaoh would act, what Pharaoh would ask. Pharaoh will ask you, what is your occupation? And then he says, you should tell him that you have tended livestock all your life. In other words, you should tell him the truth. Then he will allow you to settle in Goshen. That is the place that's the most friendly, the most habitable for people who are working with flocks. And then we come to this statement again that just was kind of rattling in my brain all week. All shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians. Now, if you know that all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians, why wouldn't Joseph say, well, whatever you do, when you answer Pharaoh and tell him what your occupation is, don't use the word shepherds. You could use the word, oh, we are good farmers. Oh, we are good, we're good at keeping our households neat and clean. But to say that we are shepherds, that's a no-no. Because he won't appreciate that. So don't say we are shepherds. But that's the opposite of what Joseph said. He said, make sure you tell them that you are shepherds. Make sure that you are honest about who you are. In a few days, we're going to, well, some of us will and some of us won't, but observe Halloween. And what is the big thing about Halloween? The big thing about Halloween is that we cover our faces with masks. so that people don't see who we are. And then we go and spook them at their house so they will give us candy. Have you ever thought about it? Spooking somebody at their house and not telling them who you are is the right way to go and ask for candy? That's kind of mixed up, isn't it? I think it is. But that's what has kind of fallen down to us in our society. It's the way that our society operates. Let's live behind a mask. And I would like to suggest this morning that there are many Christians that are living behind masks. We would like you to think that we are better than we are when we show up on Sunday morning. When I look out into the congregation, I see people who have it all together. You are smiling at me. You are looking at me as if I'm a good Sunday morning Christian. But you know what? If you are who I know you are, you don't have it all together. We have hurts. We have heartaches. We have hang-ups. We have habits. We have things that draw us down. It's called sin. And if you are going to get the right answer before God, you're going to have to come clean. You're going to have to take off the mask. You're going to have to take away all the falsehood, all the pretense. And you're going to have to be real before God. That's what God wants. And for Joseph to tell his family to be honest were two positive things. First of all, the first impression is, they're not worried about me and telling me the truth. They're just upfront. And that character of honesty would score them a positive mark in Pharaoh's life, or Pharaoh's mind. The second thing that would score a positive mark is that right now, Pharaoh was really, really pleased with Joseph. And for the sake of Joseph, Pharaoh would almost put up with anything, because Joseph had done right by Pharaoh. So basically, this was the right time to be honest. This was the time that they could be honest and be accepted. And so Joseph challenged them by preparing them ahead of time. You better tell them the truth. Then Joseph introduced 5 of his brothers to Pharaoh. There's been much speculation among commentators as to which 5 of the 5 brothers Joseph chose. We aren't specifically told, so I won't get into that speculation. But you just tell me, who do you think Joseph chose? He probably didn't choose the older brother, Reuben. He probably didn't choose the next 2 who had caused trouble. He probably started, let me get my name straight. He probably started not with Reuben, who was the firstborn. He probably started with Judah. And then I don't know which of the other 5 he used, but that's my speculation. You can go ahead and speculate as much as you want. But he announced their coming to Pharaoh in verse 1. My father and brothers have come from the land of Canaan and are now here in Goshen. And he chose his... Pardon?
John and Korea.
Pardon?
John and Korea.
Okay. They have come from the land of Canaan and are now in Goshen. And he chose the 5 brothers and he presented them to Pharaoh. And We don't know exactly who they were, but Pharaoh interviewed Joseph's brothers in verse 3 and 4. And I want you to notice the question. What was the question? Pharaoh asked them, "What is your occupation?" Exactly like Joseph had predicted.
Wheat and barley?
And they replied, "Your servants are shepherds." They took Joseph's advice. "Your servants are shepherds. We have come to live here for a while because the famine in our land is severe, and our flocks have no pasture. Please let your servants settle in Goshen." And Pharaoh granted their requests to settle in Goshen. And he spoke to Joseph in verse 5 and 6. "Your father and your brothers have come. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen." And then I want you to notice this last part. If you know of any of your brothers with a special ability, put them over my livestock. Do you know what happened in Pharaoh's mind when Joseph had told his brothers to be honest and Joseph's brothers were honest? Pharaoh started to have and demonstrate trust in those men, even though he'd never seen them before. And he says to Joseph, if you know some of them are really good shepherds, they're all shepherds, but I don't need 12 men to shepherd my flocks. Choose out the ones who you know are the best. The ones who you know have special ability. And I want them to take care of my flocks. In other words, they have shown honesty to Pharaoh. Now Pharaoh is willing to trust them. Isn't that true today? If you show yourself to be honest and truthful, the people who are in leadership over you will be more likely to trust you with what they want you to do. If you show yourself to be a liar or a cheat, nobody's going to trust you. Why? Because you're not worthy of trust. Honesty breeds trust. Honesty, even at the risk of conflict, breeds trust. Then third, Joseph introduced his father to Pharaoh, verses 7 to 10. Joseph presented his father, and he said, and in verse 7 it says, Jacob blessed Pharaoh. I want you to notice what's happening here. Jacob has only one chance to meet Pharaoh. Do you know that all of us only have one chance to make a first impression on someone else? Jacob had only one chance, and when he went into Pharaoh's presence, he did so with a blessing. Now, I want you to think about this. In order for Jacob to bless Pharaoh, what did Jacob have to sense or know in his heart? First of all, Jacob had to know that he had a close relationship with God, and he could bless Pharaoh. He could be the one who could bless Pharaoh. By blessing Pharaoh, Jacob is saying that he's closer to God than Pharaoh is. He has the ability to bless. And that's what Jacob took the risk of doing. Most people didn't go into Pharaoh's presence to bless him. Most people went into Pharaoh's presence afraid of him. Most people went into Pharaoh's presence and under their mouth or behind their back, his back probably didn't like him. But can you imagine Jacob having the courage, the first time he ever meets Pharaoh, he goes there to be the presence of God to Pharaoh and to bless him. When I read this, I thought of a man named Billy Graham. Since Harry Truman, Billy Graham has prayed with every president of the United States. Since Harry Truman. Including Obama and including Trump. That's quite amazing, isn't it? And he didn't go in to criticize their policies or even to advise them on their policies. He went in to visit them, to encourage them to seek God's guidance in their leadership of the country. He didn't care much about whether they were Democrat or Republican. In fact, he's testified that even though he is a Democrat, his closest relationship was with a Republican president. And being used by God to bless somebody else who even is in authority over you, but you have a closer relationship to God than they do, that is a marvelous testimony. And that's what Jacob did. And Pharaoh asked Jacob a question, verse 8, "How old are you?" And again, Jacob was honest with Pharaoh. He says, "My years have been 130. And he said, "My years have been few and difficult compared to my father's." When did Isaac die? 180. When did Abraham die? 175. So for him, 130 was few and difficult compared to his father's. And again, before Jacob leaves Pharaoh's presence, verse 10, Jacob blessed him. Are you a blessing to the people in whose presence you come to? Or are you a burden? I think the songwriter put it very strongly and very well. Make me a blessing to someone today. That should be our prayer, shouldn't it? And then fourthly, Joseph helped his brothers settle in the land. He gave them the land as Pharaoh directed. This was a gift. It wasn't a lease. It wasn't a rental agreement. Because of Joseph's position as second to Pharaoh, Joseph could give them the whole land as a gift. And he provided them with food according to their number. I want you to notice that in verse 12. According to their number. That helped me a little bit. You know why? I was still niggling in my mind about why it was so important for them to count everybody and to come up with a number of 70. You know why that was so important? So that Joseph knew how many to feed in this famine program that he was working on. That counting helped Joseph feed them. That's why it was so necessary back in chapter 46, verse 8 to 27. In spite of the fact that the Egyptians despised the occupation that Jacob and his sons had, Pharaoh still treated them with favor, listen to this, because of his relationship with Joseph. Now let me ask you a question. There is only one relationship that will get you into heaven. And you know what that relationship is? A relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And in order to get into that relationship with God through Jesus Christ, you have to be honest about who you are and your sin and your need. My question is to you this morning is, very fancy, but just a question. Have you been honest before God? Have you told him your need? Have you told him who you are? But Pastor, if I tell God that I'm a sinner, he might not like me. Well, guess what? If you tell God that you're a sinner and that you need his forgiveness, he will welcome you. That's who God is. And I see in this story a marvelous picture of what God is like towards us. He wants us to come to him in honesty and sincerity and tell him who we are. And when we do, we will experience God's blessing on our lives and rich favor, because God honors and lifts up the humble, but he rejects the proud. Let's pray.